I'd like to officially welcome you to the second Putting the Pieces Together conference, a conference for and by people living with pain, hosted during National Pain Awareness Week here in Canada. Putting the pieces together can be a bit of a mouthful, so you may hear us refer to it as PTPT. My name is Chris DeBow, one of the PTPT steering committee members, and I'll be your MC for today. I'm streaming to you live from Halifax, Nova Scotia, which is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral territory of the Mi'kmaq people. Today we'll have three very interesting and unique sessions. We'll start with a 1-hour presentation titled, "What Are We Doing About Pain in Canada?" This will be followed by a 30-minute guided gentle pain care yoga session, which I highly recommend for those in need of a midday energy shift. The day will end with another 1-hour presentation called The Poetics of Pain. And there will also be 15-minute breaks between sessions. So please remember that the conference has been designed for and by people living with pain. And while it's open to everyone, we've done our best to create a brave and safe space for people who live with pain. We hope we have researchers and clinicians who are also here to learn. If you are a researcher or clinician, we respectfully ask that you spend your time listening to people who live with pain rather than using these spaces for research or other purposes. And I'd like to take just a quick minute to say thank you to my fellow PTPT steering committee members. We're all people with lived experience of pain and feel honored to help create a space for people just like us to share our stories, maybe learn something new, and continue to build this very supportive and embracing community. I'd also like to thank the conference's sponsors, Pain BC, the Strategy for Patient-Oriented Research, the Chronic Pain Network, Canadian Institutes of Health Research's Institute of Musculoskeletal Health and Arthritis, and the Partnership for the Engagement of Patients with Pain Research Project. I'll now hand the mic over to Jennifer Daly-Cyr to kick off our first session. Over to you, Jennifer.
Thanks so much, Chris. Exciting day today. As Chris mentioned, my name is Jennifer Daly-Cyr, and I too am one of the steering committee members for the PTPT conference and the second annual. I can't even believe it's our second annual. It's amazing. And as the moderator for today's session, I'm really thrilled to welcome you to the opening session of the Putting the Pieces Together conference, entitled, as Chris mentioned earlier, "What Are We Doing About Pain in Canada? The 2023 Update," with Minister Yara Sachs, Jean-François Leroux, and Maria Hudspeth as our speakers today, and they'll each present their updates. Also, as Chris mentioned, this is just a reminder that we do have, during this recorded session, we have closed captioning and simultaneous French audio translation is available. And to access this, please just go to the Zoom link posted on the session description, and that will provide you with the information you need. We will take questions, certainly, and as was mentioned there, Chris described how to post your questions. We'll take the questions at the end of the speakers' talks today. And without further ado, it is my sincere pleasure to introduce our first speaker today, the Honorable Yara Sachs. Minister Sachs was first elected as a member of Parliament for York Centre in 2020. She currently serves as the Minister of Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health. Comprehensive portfolio, and please welcome our Minister Sachs today. Over to you, Minister Sachs. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Jennifer, and thank you, Chris, and thank you for everyone who's joining us today. I was appointed the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions this past July, at the end of July, and it's a file that's very, very close to my heart. I can't say how excited I was when I heard that Chris mentioned a yoga session, because aside from running a mental health charity in my previous life before MP life, I also am a master yoga teacher and a yoga therapist. So working with people with pain and chronic pain is something that I've walked through in my own life, but also helping others find ease and comfort and safety in their bodies when struggling with pain. So I'm really excited to be joining you today and to provide remarks at Putting the Pieces Together conference. it's really an important time for us to reflect on the work and the important work that's being done for those who are living with pain and how we best can support them. I will note that I'm speaking to you from my office today in Ottawa on the traditional unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe. And I always choose to take these moments of land acknowledgement to also say that these are sacred lands that we share and humbly share space with, to live and love and play and be together on, but also these acknowledgements are an opportunity for healing. And I think when we're talking about pain, hand in hand with healing is something we can all connect with. So I want to thank Pain Canada for inviting me to speak, and for the organizer who put this is your second annual event, which is absolutely incredible, because it's such an important opportunity, as Chris said, to hear the voices of those who are living with pain, to be heard, and also to share their lived and living experience to how we move forward in supporting those who are struggling with pain. Because we're continuously looking at neat ways to better address the needs of people in Canada who live with chronic pain, and your participation today really, really matters. It would be the appropriate time to acknowledge that this is National Pain Awareness Week, which allows not just in this conference, but nationally for us to reflect on the significant impact that chronic pain plays for Canadians and the work that we need to do collectively to support those who are struggling with this chronic condition. As the minister and also the federal government, it's important that we know and recognize that chronic pain affects nearly 8 million Canadians a year. And we also know that pain affects not only the physical well-being of the individual, but also impacts their mental health, their family, and community life. It can also limit one's full participation in society and in our economy. In my role as the Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and the Associate Minister of Health, I'm continuing to learn about the impact of chronic pain and understanding the significant intersectionalities between this disease and other health conditions, notably mental health and substance use, because we have to look at the whole person and their whole experience. And good health and good health practices are when we don't silo each symptom, but really look at the whole person and what their journey is. So we know that despite how prevalent chronic pain is, we have a long way to go to ensure that it's appropriately recognized, diagnosed, and treated. Because while we know there's been progress made in recent years, many Canadians continue to face significant barriers in accessing timely and appropriate services to manage their pain. The work of the Canadian Pain Task Force has been so important to understand the impact of chronic pain on Canadians, and also to identify best practices for addressing this significant health issue. The Action Plan for Pain in Canada identifies concrete priority actions that can be taken so that pain can better be understood and effectively prevented and treated across the country. I'd like to just really say thank you again on behalf of the federal government to everyone who's been involved in this work. We couldn't do it without you. Your advocacy, your advice, your expertise, your voices of those with lived and living experience with pain are really such important contributions to the work and how we move forward. And I can assure you that both I and those of us involved in the federal government are committed to continuing to do this work with you and to take action on the priorities identified by the task force. And on a personal note, I'll do yoga with any of you anytime. Another key part of my job as the minister is understanding how managing chronic pain can lead to mental health and substance use challenges. Because pain's invisible, and properly managing it can be extremely challenging. Friends, family, sometimes even our health workers and health practitioners may not really understand what an individual is going through. And when pain goes unmanaged, it can sometimes lead people to turn to harmful ways to manage their pain, like higher risk substance use. And we shouldn't shy away from those realities, because when we are able to see someone and understand their pain, and just to be present and heard in what they're experiencing, we can help mitigate substance use and other coping mechanisms that may come into play. Because we really need to do more work to help Canadians better manage their pain, because we don't want them to have to choose the substances as an alternative. We know what a tragic toll the overdose crisis has taken in communities across the country, And while we continue to work with governments and organizations and those with lived and living experience, as well as our Indigenous communities, we want to end this crisis and save lives, but we also have to understand the root causes of what someone's journey is to choose substances in managing their pain. Last week, we were proud to announce and launch the renewed Canadian Drugs and Substance Strategy, and it's been designed to support a comprehensive and compassionate approach to substance use and the related harms, as well as the overdose crisis. The renewal of this strategy is taking a whole of government approach, because as we begin to implement it, we recognize that we need to do better to support those who live with chronic pain as a way to help prevent high-risk substance use as well. And that, just as I mentioned earlier, not looking at someone's health as silo diagnoses, as well as on the government level, we have to take an intersectional and interdepartmental approach in being able to meet people where they are and what they need from different sources of our own policies that feed into the drug strategy. So what that means on my part and on the part of the government is that we need to continue to work with all of you, whether you are professional organizations, those with lived and living experiences, many of the stakeholders that are here today, so that we can advance together the priorities of the Canadian Pain Task Force, including better access to care for pain management services. And I can't emphasize enough how important it is that we work together on this, because you are our key partners in this work. And in the past year, the significant progress that's been made to advance pain priorities is really because of the collaborative work we've done together. And just to list some of the things that we've done, Pain Canada has continued to mobilize resources and coordinate efforts to better support people living with pain. And with the support of Health Canada's Substance Use and Addictions Program, the Power Over Pain portal, and if you haven't checked it out yet, I highly recommend you do, has been launched, and it provides access to free virtual pain management and resources to all Canadians. We continue to support knowledge mobilization and implementation science in pain-related areas through the renewal of the Chronic Pain Network. And finally, this past April, Solutions for Kids in Pain and the Health Standards Organization published the National Pediatric Pain Management Standard, the first standard focusing on children and youth's pain in the world. So we're taking a lead on the global stage on what it means to manage chronic pain and to see all of the members of our community, young and old, when they are challenged with chronic pain, to be able to meet them where they are and provide them with services and support when they need it. And you should all be so proud of these significant achievements, because we know that more needs to be done for those who are struggling with chronic pain to get the help that they deserve. But now that we're in our second year of this conference, I know that incredible discussions and more knowledge exchange will happen here to allow us to move forward together. Because when we take the seriousness of these health concerns seriously and recognize the individuals that need access to these services, we know that we'll be improving their quality of life. In our last federal budget, we made historic investments of close to $200 billion over the next 10 years. And we announced that these funds would be to support a renewed collaboration with provinces and territories to address some of the most pressing health priorities that Canadians are experiencing. And while we advance these priorities, we understand that the need for pain to be better considered and reflected in our policies and actions is so important for those who are living with pain, and continue to be involved in the development of these policies. You are part of the solution while we address the problem. Because if we do this together, we can truly ensure that Canadians living with pain are prioritized, as well as allocate parts of this historic investment into our health system, because pain is a key part of why people choose to go to their primary health care providers in the first place. I want to thank all of you again for the important work you're doing to improve the lives of Canadians who are living with chronic pain. And for those of you who are living with pain, please know you're not alone, and that there are options out there to help you. Everyone who is here collectively wants to support one another and our communities in this journey so that we can combat pain together. We're doing everything we can to support you in your work and every single person living with pain across Canada. Thank you for the time today, and merci.
Wow, thank you so much, Minister Sachs, for being with us today and sharing with us your commitment, the commitment of your government towards the action plan on pain in Canada. We so look forward to the further updates as this important work continues. And I have to say, as one of the over 8 million people in Canada living with chronic pain, as you mentioned, I can say it is incredibly meaningful that you, as our Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Associate Minister of Health, you are here today to open this conference, and we are grateful to you for your understanding of the far-reaching impacts of pain on the whole person and the healthcare system and as a whole. And if I could just say, I would absolutely love to take one of your yoga classes at one point in time. Thank you so much. That would be wonderful. Thank you for your time. That was a fantastic greeting and remarks talk. Thank you so much. It is now my pleasure to introduce our next speakers. We have two speakers coming up. Our two next speakers, we have Jean-François Leroux and Maria Hudspeth. Jean-François is the manager of chronic pain policy team of the chronic pain policy team, that is, with the Controlled Substances and Cannabis branch at Health Canada. In his role, Jean-François oversees the coordination of the federal response to the Canadian Pain Task Force recommendations. Following Jean-François' talk, Maria Hudspeth will join as the Executive Director of Pain BC, the sponsor organization supporting the Pain Canada Action Network. She is also the co-chair of the Health Canada's Canadian Pain Task Force, which delivered its final report and action plan for pain in Canada in 2021. So without further ado, if you could please welcome Jean-François Leroux for his talk. Over to you, Jean-François.
Thanks, Jennifer. And I'm so pleased to be here and participate in the second editions of the Putting Together the Pieces conference. Before I begin, I would just like to acknowledge that I am joining you from Ottawa on the unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin and Anishinaabe territory. As Minister Sachs highlighted in her remarks, there's been significant progress that has been made in recent years to advance awareness of the impact of chronic pain in Canada, but also efforts being undertaken across the country to better diagnose, prevent, and manage chronic pain. Next slide, please. The work of the Canadian Pain Task Force that was established in 2019 contributed greatly to this advancement. And I can't comment how thankful we are to Maria Hudspeth and Fiona for having co-chaired this task force, but also all the members that were involved in it, but also those who have contributed to this work over a three-year period between 2019 and 2020. In 2021, as Jennifer mentioned, the task force released its final report, an action plan for pain in Canada, which provided over 150 recommendations for priority actions. These actions were included as part of 6 overarching goals that you kind of like see on the screen. And these are really contributed to informing our actions moving forward, whether it is setting up the necessary foundations to maintain the collaboration and coordination efforts, identify a way to address inadequate pain care in this country, increasing awareness and our understanding of chronic pain, supporting pain research and addressing the significant surveillance gap, and finally, really ensuring that equitable approaches are being implemented for populations that are disproportionately impacted by pain. Next slide. I always like to remind people around the significant impact of the issue that we are trying to solve here. We know how chronic pain is prevalent across the country, and we know that it has significant economic implications. We know that pain, as the minister highlighted, is one of the most common reasons for seeking healthcare in this country. but unfortunately, access to specialized care is often limited. There's significant linkages between chronic pain and other health conditions, including mental health and substance use. And then we know that, as the task force highlighted in its sixth goal, the burden of pain is not equally shared among Canadians, with older adults, women, Indigenous populations, veterans, and military personnel being disproportionately affected by chronic pain. Next slide. It's also important, as we advance policies and efforts to address these issues, that we understand the linkages between chronic pain and the different federal priorities. This slide provides an overview of the many of the priorities that was reflected in recent federal budget, but also mandate letters of a number of federal health ministers. And as you can see, there's quite a lot of alignment between those priorities and the significant impacts that was reflected on the previous slide. But also as well as a number of recommendations that has been made by the task force. So the question always becomes, what do we do next? How do we actually address this major issue? And if we go to the next slide, the first thing that we did once after the task force ended its mandate in December 2021 is that we established a team within Health Canada that was able to focus on policy development for pain-related issues, but also coordinate federal actions and efforts in order to respond to Canadian Pain Task Force recommendations. It was also an opportunity with the creation of that team to maintain the momentum that was built through the creation of the task force, but also to make sure that the federal government maintained a point of entry for people living with pain and the broader pain community to engage with the federal government. As part of the team's mandate, we articulated our efforts under 3 specific goals and priorities. The first one is using existing federal levers to support pain-related priorities. What this means is identify opportunities, as the minister mentioned, to embed pain considerations into relevant federal policies and priorities. And I'll come back to this a little bit later in my presentation. We also need to identify and leverage funding opportunities to support some of the key priorities of the task force. Secondly, we need to leverage our convener role in order to support national collaboration and coordination and make sure that the best practices are implemented across the board. As reflected throughout the task force mandate, there's strong consensus around best practices and strategies for actions, things that we need to do. The challenge is often around awareness of these best practices and ensuring that there is strong collaboration or coordination to accelerate and scale what works. To this end, the team always seeks to identify opportunities to share and disseminate knowledge around best practices for pain management and prevention, working collaboratively with our federal partners, but also provinces and territories and others in order to expand this knowledge. Finally, we know that, as the task force highlighted, there's significant gaps in surveillance research around pain-related issues. So it's about how we can actually work with Statistics Canada, the Canadian Institute for Health Information, and other federal data stewards in order to advance those surveillance efforts. We also know that across these areas, that equity-oriented approach is essential to understand chronic pain in Canada. And this is why we continue to include the perspective of people living with chronic pain into our work and into the policies that we are developing in this space. Next slide, please. This is just a reflection about the complex nature of the federal government and the number of different federal departments and agencies that are actually involved in pain-related issues. Whether it is Health Canada and the public health agencies that is responsible for advancing and implementing federal health policies, the research granting agencies, so Canadian Institute of Health Research, for example, in advancing research and knowledge translation efforts. Departments such as Veterans Affairs, Indigenous Services Canada, Correctional Services, who are responsible for providing direct services to populations that are disproportionately impacted by pain, as well as Employment and Social Development Canada that are supporting programs and implementing policies to improve the standard of living and quality of life for all. Next slide. So I would now like to, now that I've spoken about the approach and all the key federal players involved in the federal response to the Canadian Pain Task Force recommendations, I want to really highlight the success of the past couple of years. As I mentioned, the chronic pain policy team was established within Health Canada as a dedicated team responsible for pain policy and coordinate federal actions. As many of you will recall, last year, Minister Bennett announced investments of $4.5 million over the next 5 years towards Pain Canada to help coordinate efforts and mobilize resources. And I'm thankful that through Pain Canada, we are able to support the conference that we are in today. Since January, through Health Canada Substance Use and Addictions Program, we also supported 14 new pain projects that resulted in new investments of $12.3 million. And I'll speak a little bit about the examples of the projects that we funded and some of these the advancements that we were able to make through these projects. Next slide, please. So in terms of the second goal to enhance or improve access to timely, equitable, and person-centered pain care, a number of new resources have now been developed, either through Pain Canada, such as the Live Plan B Plus, the Making Sense of Pains program, but also through the Power Over Pain portal that is really a one-stop shop when it comes to providing free online resources that people living with pain can actually access. There's been new standards that has been developed. We should be proud about the success of the Pediatric Pain Management Standard, which is the first such standard in the world, to providing some guidance to health professionals around how we should be managing pain in children. There's also the long-term care services standard that was released earlier this year that includes specific pain-related component as a way to make sure that people living in long-term care settings receive appropriate pain care. There are also new or updated guidelines coming up that we know, for instance, the 2017 Canadian guidelines for the use of opioids for chronic pain management is currently being updated with the expectation that the updated guidelines to be released sometime in the next year. And then finally, a number of pilot programs such as the transitional pain services or the Step Care 2.0 models are currently being tested and as a way to try to expand those types of services, specialized services across the country. Next slide, please. In terms of increasing awareness, I think this conferences like the one that we are in today, any activities during National Pain Awareness Weeks are really good example of venues that contribute to achieving this objective. Again, bringing the voices of people living with pain at the forefront of those awareness activities are so important. We should also be proud that Canada actually over the past 14 months hosted 2 international conferences, including the World Congress of Pain in September of last year, but also the International Pediatric Pain Symposium that took place in Halifax earlier this month. It really showcased, I think, the leadership that Canada is actually currently doing in this space. As it was announced last May, Health Canada continues to work with the Canadian Pain Society to organize the next annual pain conference that will be taking place next April in Ottawa. We are hopeful that this collaboration will help foster new relationship between pain experts, people living with pain, policymakers, and that this collaboration will actually lead to new opportunities to support the implementation of priority actions identified by the task force. Around education, lots of progress that has been made through mentorship programs such as the ILCO program, new curriculum being developed through the AFMC, a significant number of work to develop new gender-sensitive resources for Canadian practitioners, and so on. So lots of efforts on the education front, but again, more needs to be a lot more needs to be done on that front. Next slide, please. We mentioned the importance of pain research, knowledge translation, surveillance. Again, significant work being done on that to address this priority. CIHR recently announced the renewal of the chronic pain network, with the second phase of the network being highly focused on knowledge mobilization and implementation science. Lots of efforts being made on the knowledge translation piece, as I mentioned. Last February, we actually held in collaboration with CIHR Best Brain Exchange on really focusing on best practices for the treatment of chronic pain and concurrent complex mental health and substance use conditions. We recently published a report stemming out of this conversation, and this report is actually available on our website. That has just been updated, fresh from this moment, actually. So I encourage you to actually go read this report. Around pain surveillance, Health Canada has been working very closely with Statistics Canada in recent years, as well as other data stewards to address some of the most significant pain surveillance gaps. We just received a confirmation that chronic pain will be reflected in the core chronic conditions module of the next iterations of the Canadian Community Health Survey and the Canadian Community Children and Youth Survey. Big accomplishment, and we are really hoping that this will actually help solidify existing surveillance in this area, and so on. We've also did significant progress to make sure that pain is well reflected in other types of surveillance activities, including, for instance, around the surveillance of requests for medical assistance in dying, but also the impact of post-COVID conditions, post-COVID-19 conditions in Canada. Next slide, please. We need to continue ensuring that there's equitable access for pain care for populations that are disproportionately impacted by pain. And I think through SUOP, we've made some good progress, particularly around engagement and collaboration with Indigenous populations. There's been new projects that is now being led by World Spine Care that is building some pain management program in Cross Lake First Nations. The University Health Networks has been working in partnership with 28 Indigenous communities in Northern Ontario and Manitoba to co-create and co-disseminate educational resources on pain. 2 weeks ago, Minister of Indigenous Services hosted a second National Summit on Indigenous Mental Wellness. And again, a pain-specific session was included as part of this event, which was a great opportunity to really make sure that people are, to try to bring further awareness around the significant impact of pain amongst Indigenous populations. Children and youth, I already mentioned the pediatric pain management standard, but Power Over Pain also have a specific dedicated portal for youth, a portal that has been co-created with youth living with pain. So again, another great success on that front. Around women's pain, you may have seen that last, I think it's a month ago, about the government announcing investments of $1.6 million in funding for projects focusing on strengthening access to sexual and reproductive services for people living with endometriosis. So another example for how we actually were able to leverage existing funding mechanism to advance some work in this area. Around veterans and military personnel, Veterans Affairs Canada continue to support the work of the Chronic Pain Centre for Canadian Veterans, a national network of interdisciplinary pain management centers using research and evidence-based strategies to improve care for Canadian Armed Forces veterans and their families across the country. And finally, Correctional Services Canada continue to update its guidance document to assist practitioners involved in assessing and managing people who are federally incarcerated and who live with chronic pain. Next slide, please. So while there's significant progress, our work is far from completed. We are committed to continue working with people living with pain, with the pain experts, and others that have a responsibility for supporting the implementation of the Canadian Pain Task Force recommendations. We need to maintain our strong engagement in continuing to raise awareness about this issue. I've already spoken about the Canadian Pain Society's 2024 meeting, for which Health Canada is collaborating and co-organizing. But we also having opportunities with parliamentarians with respect to their involvement in studies on child health, for instance, on women's health. There's also the upcoming Canadian guidelines for chronic pain management around the use of cannabis products and the use of opioids for the management of chronic pain. We need to make sure that these guidelines are well implemented, and we are looking forward to continue working with stakeholders in making sure that those guidelines are well implemented across the board. Supporting the development, dissemination, and implementation of best practices. As I mentioned, we don't need to start from scratch. There's so many good work going on. It's just a matter of making sure that this work, people are aware of this work, and that we need to make sure that we support their implementation. And then continue to work collaboratively with our partners federally in order for pain to be embedded into health and social priorities. As the minister mentioned, you are part of the solutions. We need to be mindful of that, and I'm committed, and our team is committed to continue working with all of you in making this. Thank you. I'll now turn it over to Maria.
Thanks so much, JF. I just want to be sure my audio is working. Great. Okay, wonderful to be with you. I'm Maria Hudspeth. I'm the Executive Director of Pain BC, the sponsor for Pain Canada, and I had the pleasure of co-chairing the Canadian Pain Task Force with Dr. Fiona Campbell and working alongside many cherished colleagues from across the country. I guess I consider JF my wingman, or he considers me his wingwoman. We really are working together, and people have heard me speak often about what we call the top-down and bottom-up approach to addressing this very sticky issue of pain in Canada. So I was reading some of the questions posed in the Q&A, and can see, people are asking the question that we all ask, which is, what does this mean for me? What do things like surveillance and surveys and studies and scientific meetings have to do with improving pain on the ground in our communities? So I'm going to talk a little bit about that. And I want to say, at the front end, this is by no means everything that's going on across Canada in pain. So I want you to think of this as the highlights reel, and we'll talk a bit more about ways people can get involved, and also ways that you can track progress and see more about what's happening over time. So I'm coming to you from North Vancouver, British Columbia, the unceded ancestral territories of the Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh and Musqueam peoples. Very grateful to be here. And I know we had nearly 800 people register for the conference. Some are participating on Zoom, some on FeedLoop, and many more who registered in hopes of watching at a later time. So we know that folks are joining from unceded and ancestral territories across this country, and we're grateful to be here together. So a little bit about Pain Canada. When the task force was mandated, there was tremendous excitement, momentum, a lot of cohesion, people coming together to move this agenda forward. And many of us shared anxiety about what would happen after the task force mandate ended. To that end, we knew we needed a national action network, something that would drive this work forward from the bottom up and also be a central sort of partner for the federal government as they were moving forward. Pain BC agreed to create and host this action network called Pain Canada, and we've been working on a number of strategic priorities. Of course, we want to empower people who live with pain to connect with each other and access care and resources. We want to help people collaborate. Often these are researchers and policymakers, and really bringing people who live with pain into those decision-making and knowledge generation spaces. We want to help health professionals, but other professionals. JF was talking about Corrections Canada. We want people wherever, in whatever system people with pain are interacting, we want the professionals in that system to understand pain, to be able to be compassionate, to do good assessments. So we're working with professionals to provide education and resources. We know that when we look at other kinds of health conditions, whether these are mental health conditions or things like arthritis, cancer, diabetes, there are unbelievable number of not-for-profit organizations that serve those causes. And similarly, there are millions of dollars of philanthropic and government investment that go to support those organizations. In Canada, we have probably both hands counting the number of organizations, and many of them remain unfunded, small grassroots organizations. So part of what Pain Canada is about building that community infrastructure and helping those groups grow. And of course, providing a megaphone for pain advocates to share their messages. Okay, quick highlight of the kinds of things that are offered through Pain Canada. So we have Live Plan B Plus. This is an online free interactive self-management program. It was built through a collaboration with researchers, health experts, and people with lived experience. And it's an easy portal. You can hear the stories of people living with pain and really build skills to manage. It's available in French and English. And easy to use. It's featured on the Power Over Pain portal, which is a clearinghouse of various kinds of virtual resources. And it also links up to free counseling that's available anywhere in Canada. So peer support. We know that as many people say, unless you've lived with pain, you really don't know what it's like. And so Pain BC and Pain Canada has a big emphasis on building out infrastructure for peer support. We know the benefits of it. We know that it needs to be more available. So we've been working with partner organizations like PIPIN, which is the People in Pain Network, our friends in Quebec, the Association Québécoise de la Douleur Chronique, and other folks to increase access to peer support. Those groups have come together. They're now sharing training that's provided through Pain Canada. We've developed new manuals and facilitator topics for those groups, and those are available in 5 languages: Mandarin, Cantonese, Punjabi, Arabic, French, and English, as well as culturally tailored versions for LGBTQ populations. So we're helping to spread peer support into new settings across the country. Making Sense of Pain. This is a program that has been offered through many different sites in BC. It's a group program. It's often provided in person with very diverse settings, whether it's an Indigenous community hosting it, an addiction treatment center hosting it, or a community clinic. Really, really diverse settings. And Pain BC and Pain Canada raise the funds for this, and then we support the delivery in different settings. This is also now available in 5 languages and culturally tailored versions, and it is scaling across Canada. You can see the sites that we currently have on board. We're on track to deliver 13 groups across the country in this next fiscal year. And we have a number of these culturally tailored pilots. It's happening in very diverse ways. In some places, it's operating as an online service. So in Alberta, people can call the nurse line and be referred into an online version of this program, and it's operating in a couple of other places in Alberta in Cantonese and Mandarin. It's been happening here in BC in a number of First Nations communities. So a great low barrier trauma-informed program available in communities. Let's talk a little bit about the resources available for health professionals. So we have a program called Moving Through Pain. This is a little screen cap of the type of content that's available. And this helps health professionals guide people who live with pain to regain movement and function. We know that when people are hurting, it's very scary to think about moving. Yet, as the physiotherapists tell us over and over again, motion is lotion. So motion really helps people regain the ability to do things that they want to do in their lives. And we have to help health professionals learn how to help people with pain to do that. We have another course that we'll be launching by the end of the year called Pain Foundations. This is a module-based program. It's very accessible. Again, just a screen cap of the type of content. It's a trauma-informed program. It's accredited, and it will be freely available to health professionals across the country by the end of the year. We're doing work around pre-surgical education, both for people who live with pain, undergoing surgery, and health professionals. They'll be tracking the outcomes and demonstrating the effectiveness of this program. And we're working with a number of hospital surgical programs to launch this next year. We're working with partners at the Canadian Pain Society. Many of you have been attending these monthly free webinars. They feature researchers, clinical and lived experience experts with additional rounds for trainees. These are free resources, and we've been grateful for the leadership of people with lived experience who have been partnering on these with researchers and others. In the research space, we're seeing incredible new infrastructure for engagement. So both through the Chronic Pain Network funded by CIHR and the PEPPER project funded by SSHRC, there are these engagement hubs that are being developed, and that will facilitate the knowledge of what we used to call patient engagement among researchers and policymakers, and also create opportunities for people to come together. I could go on and on. There's so many things happening, but I just want to give a shout out to the National Advisory Committee for Pain Canada. These are people who live with pain, leaders from pain organizations, researchers, expert clinicians, and policymakers, and they've been a tremendous resource to us. Through Pain Canada, we're also helping these leaders of organizations to grow their organizations, and even seeing the launch of new organizations like a new group called Pain Ontario, which will be launching in 2024. So you know what we're doing here. We're amplifying the voice of people who live with pain and amplifying advocacy. Last year during Pain Awareness Week, we had over 500 partners in the campaign with reach of about 1.4 million, and seeing all kinds of things happening on the policy space that we'll talk about more over the life of the conference and beyond. So I'm going to stop share, and I know that we are running out of time, but I just wanted to quickly show people. There was a question about, how are we going to know what's being done around pain in Canada, and how can we be certain that we're seeing progress? So I just want to give you a sneak peek of the new action plan tracker that's been developed by the Pain Canada team. This is a place that you can go. It's being updated on a regular basis. It outlines the goals under the action plan, these 150 plus little dots that you see in color. And you can look for a goal. You'll see the actions aligned with that goal. You can click on one. You'll see the specific recommendation, and you'll see action that's been done towards that. Up on the top, you can toggle to look at things that are in progress, completed, or not started. And again, this is something we'll continue to crowdsource information and update so that we can demonstrate progress against this collective mission we're all working towards. I know we have a few minutes left for questions. I apologize for moving so quickly, but grateful to be here, and I think to come back with Jennifer and JF and open the floor to some questions.
Thank you so much. I just want to say what an incredible update you provided to us today, and you mentioned it yourself, Maria, but the way this group is bringing a voice to those living with pain is absolutely phenomenal. And in fact, as I was watching many of the questions coming through, many of them you were able to address from the standpoint, you were both able to address from the standpoint of those living with pain, how can they get more involved, what is happening right now, what are the timelines, and so on. And there were also some specific ones, as I get caught up with the questions here, there were some specific ones for you, JF. These include around when will some of these the recommendations be implemented, and what metrics are being used. And I'm going to capture these together because you may be able to answer them together. And how can a patient access these best practices and that you were identifying for your team? And so let's start with that for you, JF.
Thank you. Well, I think it speaks to the importance of data and surveillance. And we know from what we've learned from the Canadian Pain Task Force is, unfortunately, there's a lot of surveillance gaps right now in terms of the management of pain. One of the primary reasons for that is because for many years, chronic pain was not reflected as its own chronic condition or its own chronic health. So what happened on that front is that no one was actually tracking anything in relation to chronic pain. They were tracking issues and then we were kind of like using proxies. This is something that we are trying to fix. And in terms of metrics, as we are advancing our work around the surveillance piece, we are hopeful that at some point in time, we will be able to really track some of the progress in terms of better services for people living with pain. Less reduced wait time to access specialized pain care. So those are the kind of like ultimate outcomes, ultimate metrics that we are hopeful. But I think the tracker that Maria just highlighted is just kind of like a reflection about how we are tracking our action against the task force recommendations, and also identifying what are the remaining gaps, which is also an important part of that of the puzzle.
Phenomenal. I'm struck by how incredible it is to watch how government is finding solutions to integrate it both top down and bottom up in terms of fully across this whole spectrum of pain. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, one of the pieces that came up was a question regarding a provincial level support, and someone in Manitoba asking about the research there. That was Wendy. I'm wondering if, what you mentioned earlier, Maria, in terms of what we heard through the new interactive website that you've just launched, and, both accountability tool, as JF has mentioned, and providing hope so that people can see what's actually happening. I'm wondering if you might see that as an answer to that question in terms of what's happening at the national or provincial level.
Yeah, thanks, Jennifer. And I did reply to Wendy's question about Manitoba, and I'll reply to some of the other questions as we finish this session. We're seeing almost all of the provinces and territories move towards expanding clinical services for pain. So here in British Columbia, our Provincial Health Services Authority just launched something called Pain Care BC. It's a health improvement network, and it's bringing together all of our health authorities, looking at things like standardized data collection, a patient registry, centralized intake, those kinds of things, and building a business case for expanded access to care. In Manitoba last spring, their provincial government allocated just over $4 million in new investments for pain clinics. In Ontario, we've seen almost double investment in pain clinics, both on pediatric and adult specialized services. In Alberta, they're advancing their provincial strategy for pain. So they just funded a new provincial pain program, and we're seeing movement there as well. Newfoundland is working on a provincial strategy. So we're seeing this grow. Quebec has a really strong network of services, and they're building their infrastructure. So I think what we see again is this synergy, this top down, we have a national action plan. Well, that influences the provinces and territories. And then we have all this bottom up activity that also influences them. So we need to keep pushing on the sandwich and really make a meaningful difference on the ground. The health services are designed and delivered by provinces and territories, and they are coming to the table, and we need to continue to make that happen.
Thank you. Thank you. And I think we have time for one more question. I'm just reviewing what we have here. Maria, you said you had mentioned, you've answered quite a few of them, so I don't want to duplicate what you already have. There were some questions around, specific ones around what to do during flares. I'm wondering if maybe that we can point people to the resource for that, perhaps Power Over Pain.
Jennifer, maybe I'll interject and say, I did see some questions saying, how do I get involved? And I think this is part of what we're trying to do with this conference, is build a movement to continue this work. And so connecting with Pain BC and Pain Canada through social media, signing up for our newsletters, like there will be more and more opportunities to be engaged, both in the work that we're doing nationally, but also in your local networks. We're very good at introducing people to one another and playing that matchmaker or relationship broker role. So please just reach out to us through many of the channels that exist, and we'll look forward to having you engaged in the work going forward.
Phenomenal. Thank you so much. And I have to say, I know that we could go on for a while, but Chris, I'm going to hand this back to you so you can wrap up the session that is packed. Thank you to all our speakers today.
Thank you, Jennifer, and thanks so much to Minister Sachs, Jean-Francois, and Maria. It's inspiring to hear what you're all doing on behalf of people who experience pain in Canada, and I personally feel very grateful